Chapter 6D Rylafar. A small smile slowly crawled on the face of the supervisor as the heat that Hannah was releasing was fiery enough for it to reach her, even though she was already meters away from the flaming creature. The flames in Hannah's body did not really offset from her body too much, tightly wrapping her body like some sort of loose suit. However, from time to time, there were flares flailing out from her, almost like a laser or a flash of light that made the temperature rise even further. "That's fine. Examining Hannah Ross." The supervisor then wrote something on her file as she finally pulled her eyes away from Hannah. "You may go back to your line." "Next. What are you doing?" "Go back to your line." But to her surprise, Hannah did not move from her spot, still slightly hovering from the ground as the flames on her body burned even hotter, almost releasing some sort of searing noise that whispered to the ears of the other contestants. Sylvie Saveliana, who moved several steps backward because she saw Riley doing the same, finally realized why he did so. The current examinee, Hannah Ross, can't control her powers that well. "Chill out, sis." Hannah then turned towards the supervisor as she once again urged her to return to her line. And although her words seemed relaxed, the stress in her voice was clear for everyone to hear. It also didn't help that when she looked at her brother, the only thing he did was pull up his zipper even higher and tighten his hoodie while taking another few steps back. Hannah Ross had never really once explored her power. She did enough that it was able to help her light up the stove or help her father when he needed to repair his tools with a shrink tube. There were also her slight outbursts, but other than that, she wasn't interested enough for her to practice it religiously. After all, no one in her family other than her had superpowers. Her mother, Diana Ross, had the strength of a gorilla, but it wasn't really a superpower. She just became like that from the stress of having to take care of the rest of the family. As for her father, Bernard Ross, he is also a normal human, at least the peak of what humans could achieve. Even though he was part of the most famous superhero league in the world, he didn't have any superpowers. He was able to join it due to the masterful use of his tools, which he had also created by himself. He was also a master of all the fighting styles and martial arts one could think of, even creating one or two of his own style. Okay, maybe his father was a bit extraordinary after all. But still, Whitaking, by definition, no matter how extraordinary, is still a normal human. And her brother, well, no one really knew he was a super until they just randomly told them. "Hannah Ross, please return to your line." I said chill out. The flames around her grew even stronger as the supervisor once again urged her to go down. With her scream, the other younger examinees could not help but slightly feel a small panic, causing some of them to let out a small gasp. But still, they did not move from their spot as they thought it would be seen as a weakness. "Is your sister all right?" Sylvie then slightly leaned closer towards Riley. Riley, however, instead of answering her, only stared at her straight in the eyes. If Sylvie wasn't weirded out by him before, she was now. However, Riley's blue eyes, which were almost glowing, made it hard for Sylvie to move her eyes away from him. But finally, after a few more seconds of this awkward situation, Riley answered. "She's fine," he muttered monotonously before turning his attention back to her sister. "She's perfect." Hearing this, Sylvie slowly took a step away from Riley. "Could it be you are unable to control your powers?" "I can, just shut up." The supervisor then slowly approached Hannah, while still writing something down on her file. What are you doing?" "Stay away. Now I know why they chose me as the supervisor." The supervisor then let out a long and deep sigh as she gently dropped the examinee's files on the ground as she continued to approach Hannah. "It's because of you, Wah." Before Hannah could finish her words, a light snap whispered in her ears as the supervisor suddenly clapped her hands. The supervisor then stretched her arms to the side, and as soon as she did so, spheres of water suddenly emerged like a bubble to her sides, materializing out of nowhere. And without even any warning, she once again clapped her hands. The two spheres of water, almost the size of a tank, quickly sandwiched Hannah as they merged into one huge sphere, completely confining her inside. It was a good thing that her father had made her a suit. made from materials that were able to withstand the extreme heat and fire that her power produces. If not, then everyone would have had a clear view of her naked body as soon as the water prison confined her. But still, even with her whole body drowning in water, some of the flames persisted, boiling a part of the sphere. Seeing this, the supervisor slightly flicked her finger, causing the sphere of water to compress even tighter. Darkday's eyes slightly twitched as she saw his sister struggling, gasping for air as the ball of water continued to restrict her breath, his fingers slightly itching as he turned his attention towards the supervisor. If he kills the supervisor here, was there a chance he might be discovered? He could probably make her head explode without even anyone noticing, but that would surely garner the attention of the hierarchs of the academy. A more stealthy approach, then, the supervisor let out a small gasp of air as she felt her chest slightly tightening, her heart slowly beating in a chaotic manner. Seeing her slightly flinch, a smile could not help but slowly build up on Darkday's face. He then took a long and deep breath as he felt the beating of the supervisor's heart on the palm of his hand. Just one grip, then her life would be over. It had been a long time since he had last taken someone's life, 2 months at least. His fingers were truly just shaking from the excitement. Please, stop this. But before he could psychogenically squeeze the life out of the supervisor, a loud voice rang through his left ear, causing him to stop. Sylvie then rushed forward, patting the supervisor on the shoulder. Please stop, Miss Supervisor. She's going to drown if you do not release her soon. Although her words were somewhat fluent, the tiny bit of her Russian accent remained in her voice. Weird, Riley thought. Mega Woman's accent was completely American. Was it possible this Sylvie was a relative from far away, but she and Mega Woman looked too much alike for them to be distant relatives? Perhaps Mega Woman's husband was from Russia. Once again, Riley found himself looking at Mega Woman Jr. If he killed him, would she also have the same kind of immortality as Mega Woman? If she did, then that would probably prove his assumption that she was, indeed, Mega Woman's daughter. But what if she didn't? What if she just dies if he kills her? Then she'd just die without even having the chance of getting stronger. A flower gone too soon is just weed, Riley thought. Riley's eyes started to move randomly as different scenarios appeared in his mind, but after what seemed like a second, he finally reached a conclusion on how he would know who she truly was. He'd just ask her once he had the chance to do so. With Sylvie patting the supervisor's shoulder, the tight feeling in her chest also gradually faded away, waking her up from the slight stupor she found herself in. She quickly released the sphere of water, causing Hannah to drop down from the air. Hannah's grasp for air whispered to the ears of the other examinees, causing them to wince from the cracking of her voice. Are you all right? Sylvie quickly rushed towards to help her, while the supervisor waved her hand, calling for the medics to come forward. I'm fine, Hannah said as she struggled to even stand up from almost having drowned. Thanks. Sylvie then had no choice but to back away as the medics came rushing in, quickly taking her away to the side. Riley was about to follow them, but Hannah quickly waved her hand and gestured to her to stay, which he did. The other examinees could not help but whisper and murmur to each other as they watched her being taken away. They were first awed by Sylvie's display of her powers. However, with Hannah's performance, most of it was completely burned away. This is what the academy is for, children. The supervisor then picked up the files of the examinees from the ground, patting it for any dirt. That girl was a fine example of why it is dangerous for you to keep hiding your powers. Some are too lethal to be contained. Hearing the supervisor's words, some of the examinees could not help but nod in agreement. Even Sylvie let out a sigh as nodded. The only one that was not moving his head was Riley, whose eyes were still following his sister as she was being checked by the medics. Let's move on. Next, I said next. It's your turn. Riley blinked a couple of times as he heard Sylvie's voice. He then looked at her, before moving his eyes to the front as he finally heard the supervisor calling for him. Next, stop dawdling, you're holding up the line. D. Riley Ross, Telekinesis. Chapter 7. Oops. D. Riley Ross, Telekinesis. Hearing Riley's monotonous voice, the other examinees quickly looked at each other. Ross, is he related to the fire girl earlier? Most likely, they're just next to each other. But still, why is he wearing something like that in the middle of summer? Even more so with them being related. The other examinees could not help but whisper to each other as Riley slowly made his way to the front. With him still wearing sunglasses as well as his hoodie zipped all the way up to his nose, he was completely covered up. "I need to see your face, Mr. Riley." The supervisor, of course, was also slightly weirded out by Riley. She knew who the two were, as she knew the identity of their father, who would also happen to be teaching in the academy once the school year started, and so, even more, she had to be strict with them. There were also many other children who were the sons or daughters of other superheroes. She was told not to give them any special treatment, and she was going to do just that. Hannah was quite an interesting case, a loose cannon that perhaps would benefit most from attending the academy. It was wise of Whiteking to hide her from the world, as her powers would surely attract the attention of the people, but mostly the terrorists that were crawling through the depths. She wasn't the only pyrokinetic in the world, but she was one of the few that is still alive, or not part of an evil organization. But to think he wasn't only hiding one, but two soups. She was about to make Riley take off his hoodie once again, but as soon as she rechecked his file and saw that the sun was harmful to his skin, she quickly made him stop. Riley, however, did not, as he casually took off his jacket. Hannah, who was being checked by the medics, quickly pushed them away as she rushed towards her brother. "It's all right, Hannah," Riley said as he threw his hoodie and sunglasses towards her. "I applied sunscreen," he said in a monotonous tone as he raised his thumb. SPF 150. He did not really need to. The sun was not really harmful to his skin. At least not anymore. But to appease his sister, he still chose to apply it. But still, Hannah continued to step towards Riley to give him back his hoodie. But before she could do so, she was pulled away by the medics who were previously checking up on her. She wanted to resist, but could not do so as she might harm the people blocking her path, and so the only thing she could do was hope that nothing would happen to her brother. Everyone else, however, had their eyes wide open. With the sun shining down on him, Riley looked as if he was glowing. It did not help that he was wearing a white shitter under an Heaton albino. A whisper escaped from one of the other examinees. "Wow, first time I am seeing one." So that's why he was fully covered up. Once again, the other examinees began to look at each other. Sylvie was perhaps the only one who did not react that strongly, as she had already partly seen his face earlier when he was creepily smiling at her. But still, looking at him now, a slight interest was slowly growing inside of her. Hannah had already made her interested as soon as she showed her fiery powers. So, as her brother, she could not help but wonder just what kind of strength this Riley has, she thought as she tried her hardest not to miss even the tiniest detail. "That's enough, quiet down." The examinees' whispers quickly dispersed as soon as the supervisor clapped her hands once more. "You can begin," she then said as she checked on Riley. "Okay." Hearing the supervisor's words, Riley carefully grabbed something from his pocket, and Hannah, who was still being checked by the medics, could not help but almost stumble as soon as she realized what was in Riley's hand. His cutlery set. "Riley Ross, telekinesis." Riley once again repeated his introduction as the knife, fork, and the spoon in his hand slowly started to float in the air. "That's it," was the collective thought of everyone there. Their breaths of disappointment quickly covered the entire field as they looked at Riley. With the way he looked, as well as the performance of his sister before him, they all thought that Riley would do something special, or at least match the intensity of his sister's powers. But making spoons float, every child who has awoken with telekinetic powers could do that. "That's it." Finally, the supervisor voiced out all of their thoughts. "I am afraid you won't be able to pass the exam if that's all you can do. Remember, the purpose of the academy is to train the next superhero that would become the next mega woman. If this is all that you could do at your age, I am afraid that it would be impossible for you to even think of achieving that, and that goes for all of you," the supervisor then said as she looked at the other remaining examinees. "If you think that—" "Oh my God!" Before the supervisor could finish her words, One of the examinees suddenly screamed. She was going to ask why he did so, but she didn't have to. As soon as she moved her body, she felt a slight pain coming from her torso. She quickly looked towards her chest, only to see something lodged into it. She then turned her head towards the cutlery that was spinning round Riley, which was now missing a piece, the spoon. "Oh no," Riley hummed. "I apologize. Like my sister, I also can't control my power that well," he said as he flicked his finger. "Kitty." The supervisor could not help but slightly wince in pain as the spoon lodged in her chest began to move, shaking erratically as it was slowly being pulled away. "Yes, stop," the supervisor muttered as she grabbed the spoon. "Don't make it any worse, sorry. It's doing it on its own." "It's not, just stop using your powers." The supervisor then stretched her arms to the side as she once again summoned spheres of water. I did it." However, before she could do anything with them, the spoon penetrating her chest quickly dislodged itself, causing her to take in a short but very deep breath, which made the spheres of water drop and scatter on the ground. Medic, if the spoon was just a little bit to the right, then it would have definitely hit her heart. And so, as soon as she was able, she quickly called for the medics, who were able to at least quickly stop her from bleeding using their powers. With her now away from death's door, she quickly stood up from the ground and rushed towards Riley, who quickly hid his cutlery back in his pocket. "Are you all right now, Supervisor? The supervisor wanted to slap Riley's head in, but as he said, it wasn't truly his fault. She should have known from her sister that Riley's powers aren't that simple. Just from the fact that the spoon he was controlling was accidentally able to pierce her skin was enough proof that he was also hiding great strength in him. And so, with that thought, the supervisor could only grit her teeth in frustration as she shook her head. "I'm fine. Accidents happen all the time. Go back to your line." "Did I pass?" "Don't ask me that." The supervisor raised her voice as she ordered Riley to go back to his line. "We are going to take a few minutes break. Those who are already done, you can go ahead and take the assessment test instead of dawdling around here." Hearing the supervisor's words, the other examinees could not help but once again voice out their disappointment. They were having fun watching all sorts of other people display their powers. It was like watching an audition live, which is practically what they were doing now. But alas, they could do nothing but disperse. "It's not your fault, Riley." Hannah walked beside her brother as soon as she was able to. "It's that bitch's fault for triggering us. Gather untrained children with unpredictable powers in one area. What a good idea. Whoever thought of this is stupid. Stupid, I tell you, just like the government." "Really?" Riley looked at his sister straight in the eyes. "I think it's quite fun." "Of course it is." Hannah rolled her eyes as she hastened her steps. From a recluse, anything would seem fun. "Come, let's just take the goddamn stupid tests and get this over with." "I am sorry for dragging you here, Sister Chi." "Stop being so dramatic." Hannah slightly trembled as she heard Riley's words. But after a few moments, she stopped walking and turned her head towards Riley, carrying a small smile on her face. "Besides, your Kindle right, it is somewhat fun, isn't it?" Chapter 8 For a normal school life. "My God, this is so boring. Just how long do we have to wait here?" "But you just said a while ago that this is quite fun." "That was earlier. Jesus, just how many soups are there for the interviews to take this long?" "I am not Jesus, sister, but do you still want me to answer your question?" "Shut the fuck up." Riley and Hannah, along with many other examinees, had just finished answering their assessment test and were just waiting to be called by one of the academy's staff. They were still in the same room where they took the written test, and so many others were also having their private conversation, making friends with future potential classmates. The girl that Riley had hypothesized to be Mega Woman's daughter, Sylvie, was also in the same room, surrounded by a lot of examinees asking her different sets of questions. Even without the official school year even starting, even without knowing if they will pass or not, most of the people in the room were already forming their own groups. The two siblings, however, seemed to be in a world of their own as they continued to only talk with one another. Some of the examinees that sat near them held signs of obviously wanting to converse with the two, but quickly backed out as soon as they heard Hannah cursing. Did you know that there are theories that Jesus is actually one of the earliest recorded super? Please don't. Just don't ever tell that story to anyone if you want to gain even a single friend. Hannah quickly covered her brother's mouth before he could start his ridiculous story. This actually wasn't the first time she would be hearing that story from him, as he had already told that story once when their mother had told Riley to share what he was up to lately one innocent dinner time. And that one innocent dinner time had quickly turned into something gruesome, as Riley's story did not really end on a good note. Oh, I think I have heard of that once. Riley quickly looked to the side as one of the examinees suddenly jumped between him and his sister, completely avoiding the examinee's eyes. The fuck? Hannah could not help but slightly raise an eyebrow with the sudden appearance of the young man. Hello, privacy, close, but my name is Gary. The young man then reached out his hand towards Hannah as he let out a wide smile. I already know your name, so you don't really need to introduce yourself, right? The name's Hannah. Hannah squinted her eyes as she shook the young man's hand. Did you need something? She then said as she quickly let it go. No, not really. Gary shrugged his shoulders as he turned his attention towards Riley, reaching his hand towards him. I was just curious about your brother's story, really. Was it? That is my name. Yes, although Riley answered Gary's question swiftly, he didn't take his hand, which caused Gary to turn towards Hannah, as if gesturing if he did something wrong. My brother's just selective with people, Hannah said as she squinted her eyebrows even further, especially to those who get too close. Oh, I see. Gary blinked a couple of times as he retracted his hand. Is he autistic or something? What the fuck did you say? The other examinees present in the room quickly shut their mouths as the sound of a desk screeching on the floor rang through their ears. All of them quickly turned their eyes towards the direction of the noise, only to see a girl grabbing someone by their collars. What's happening? Most of them began to whisper, wondering what was going on. They quickly recognized Hannah, making their whispers louder and more targeted. Those who were near the commotion started to tell their version of the events of what just transpired. Really? That guy called her brother like that? Is it true? Though he does seem kind of off. That kinda makes him dangerous, right? He was the one who stabbed the supervisor earlier. Hearing the words that were reaching her ears, Hannah could not help but click her tongue as she looked Gary straight in the eyes. As for Gary, he already had both his arms raised in surrender, letting out an awkward chuckle as he apologized to Hannah. Sorry, I didn't mean anything rude by it, he said. I also have a friend that is in the spectrum, so I just assumed that you would be fine with me calling him that. I truly am sorry. Stop fucking laughing. You think calling someone you just met autistic is fine? Although the volume of her voice was low, the agitation in Hannah's tone was clear for everyone to hear. A hint of smoke was also starting to emerge from the collar of Gary's shirt. Sorry, I laugh when I'm nervous. Gary once again chuckled awkwardly as a hint of sweat trailed from his face. I really didn't mean anything by it. Please don't burn my shirt. I just bought this. You, please calm down, Ms. Ross. Before Hannah could say another word, she felt a light tap coming from her shoulder. She turned her head to see who it was, only to find Sylvie shaking her head at her. If a supervisor sees you doing this, it might affect your chances of getting into the academy. The simpleton had also apologized. Perhaps settle this at another time if it happens again. Oh, ouch. Gary could not help but stutter as he was suddenly called a simpleton. And so, with Sylvie getting in between them, as well as the looks they were getting from the other examinees, Hannah could only let go of Gary. I really didn't mean it. Gary once again apologized towards Hannah, before turning his attention to Riley and apologizing to him as well. Seeing him sincerely regretting his action, Hannah finally let out a sigh as she waved her hand. I might have overreacted a little bit. Thank you for holding me back, Ms. Savaliana. But you can just call me Sylvie, Ms. Ross. Sylvie let out a small hum as she let out a small smile. Then you can just call me Hannah as well. Hannah and Sylvie then proceeded to shake each other's hands as they introduced themselves. Gary. Why are you still here? Right. Seeing Hannah glaring at him, the only thing that Gary could do was let out a sigh and turn around. Sorry for calling you autistic, Riley. He then once again apologized before taking his leave. However, before he could even take 3 steps, Riley unexpectedly replied to him. "Why do you keep on apologizing?" Riley muttered monotonously. "You're right, I am diagnosed with autism, which indeed makes me autistic." That's... Gary could only take in a gulp as another drop of sweat started to trail on his face. Hannah, on the other hand, could not help but plant her palm on her face as she let out a long and deep sigh. It almost felt like she wasted her anger and agitation for nothing. Throughout their years together, she had only seen Riley lie once or twice, and it was for something totally ridiculous. Of course, he won't lie even for his own sake. As for Sylvie, she just let out a small "oh" as she finally realized why he was smiling at her earlier. He was probably just having a hard time trying to start up a conversation. He is kinda cute, isn't he? I want to take him home. As for the other examinees, well, let's just say all sorts of thoughts were starting to race through their minds. This weird atmosphere would have probably continued if not for the academy supervisor that entered the room. "Riley Ross, it's your turn for the interview." And it just so happened that the center of all the attention was the next one to be called. "Don't say anything weird, all right?" Hannah quickly fixed Riley's hair and straightened out his clothes. "Normal school life, let's achieve a normal school life. Please, we are in a school for superpower individuals." "Sister, I am afraid that's impossible," was Riley's answer as he followed the supervisor out of the room. "Your brother is quite a handful, isn't he?" Sylvie let out a small giggle as she watched Riley's back disappear from the door. "Tell me about it." Hannah's sighs almost filled the entire room. "You seem to really love your brother, though," Gary said as he shook his head. "Man, I am jealous. I wish I could have." "What the fuck are you still doing here?" Riley Ross, age 16. "And your power is telekinesis, I suppose? And we were told that you caused an accident during the demonstration, I suppose." Riley now found himself surrounded by 5 people, all wearing a unique set of costumes. And, as a matter of course, Riley recognized the 5. They were all superheroes that he had encountered before in his adventurous life as Dark Day. "The people in this room all know who your father is," one of the interviewers that had his eyes covered with a blindfold said. "So in respect to him, we are going to give it to you straight. With the answers you gave in the assessment test, you are not suited to be a superhero. Chapter 9Q and A. Based on the answers you gave in the assessment test, you are not suited to be a superhero, I suppose." The 5 superheroes that were interviewing Riley could not help but turn their heads to each other as they awkwardly waited for him to say more. But even after almost a quarter of a minute, his mouth remained unmoving as he just sat there, staring silently towards the wall behind them. "Do not be dejected, young man. We will not fail you just because of this." And finally, after what seemed like another full minute of silence, one of the interviewers decided to speak. It was the superhero known as Spectacular Mustache Man, named obviously because of the abnormally long but straight mustache sticking off of his face. "That is why we are having this interview in the first place, to discuss the answers you chose more in depth," he said as he scanned the paper in front of him while stroking his mustache. And after checking it for a few seconds, he let out a long and deep sigh as he turned his focus back to Riley, who was still just quietly staring at the wall. "Let me be honest with you, young man. The result of your test is absolutely horrendous." With Spectacular Mustache Man's words reverberating through the room, the other 4 heroes all nodded their heads in agreement. "We will let the fact that you accidentally hurt a supervisor in the earlier test slide, as it says here in your file that you have only awakened to your powers a few months ago. Your answers to the assessment test, however, are something that we can't overlook. Are you listening?" "I am, right." Spectacular Mustache Man could not help but slightly squint his eyes as Riley answered him nonchalantly. "Let's move on and discuss your answers. So in the very first question, the test asked you what you would do if you see an old woman struggling to cross the street, and from the forgiven choices, you chose to push her off the street. Where on earth would you choose that? Because she is struggling. Then you could have just chosen to help her cross the street." "Why?" Riley blinked a couple of times as he slightly tilted his head to the side. The test said she is already struggling to cross the street. Why would I help her struggle more? That is not something a hero would do. What? Spectacular Mustache Man furrowed his eyebrows in confusion. What do you mean? She is struggling to cross the street, so the obvious way to alleviate her struggle is to help her cross the street. I see, Riley muttered. I suppose I may have misunderstood the question. How can someone even misunderstand that question? It was the most simple question in the whole test, the 5 superheroes thought as they once again turned their heads to each other. And what does he mean by that is not something a hero would do? So pushing an old woman off the street was something a hero would do. It was already implied in Riley's file that he was diagnosed with some form of autism, but to think his lack of social awareness was to the point that it almost made them slightly uncomfortable. And so, once again, the room was filled with silence. It wasn't until the only female superhero from the group of interviewers stood up that the silence was broken. The others wondered what she was going to do, but she didn't really give them a sign as she proceeded to sit on the floor in front of Riley. Hi Riley, my name is Scarlet Mage. Do you know who I am? Riley only slightly moved his eyes a bit, before nodding his head. Of course, he knows who she is. He almost killed her once. And it wasn't only her, the remaining 4 had also almost been killed by him. The only reason they were still alive today was because Mega Woman would always come in to save the day. He could probably kill them now, but alas, for the duration of Mega Woman's recovery, he was in retirement. You don't have to worry. Okay, Scarlet Mage then let out a smile, her voice sweet enough to warm up the whole room. Everyone in this academy is your friend, especially us in this room. Okay, thank you for your kindness, Scarlet Mage. But I am not a child. You do not need to treat me as such. Of course not. Scarlet Mage let out a giggle as she looked at the paper she was holding. I have another question. Is that all right with you? Yes, as Spectacular Mustache Man said. That is what this interview is for. Okay. This is question 16. You have an Archimere that you have finally beaten after a long arduous battle. Your Archimere is completely tired, beaten, and unable to move, allowing you to do anything you want. What would you do? My answer to that question is letter. I want to know your answer now, not what you chose in the written test, Scarlet Mage said as she looked Riley straight in the eyes. And please, look at me when you answer. Is that necessary? Yes. As soon as Riley heard that, his eyes, which had been fixated on the wall, finally moved away, landing itself on Scarlet Mage. Look at my eyes, Riley. It's all right. I am your friend. Riley let out a short but deep sigh as he returned Scarlet Mage's gaze. What would you do in that situation, Riley? I will let her live and surrender her to the authorities. Why? Because that is what a superhero would do. But what if you are not a superhero? What if this is just some random individual that had killed your father? That is impossible. My father will not be beaten by some random indie. Just humor me, please. Then I will not have to do anything. The Hope Guild will hunt her down as he is a member. What if he killed your mother, your sister, and you're just a young man who finally has the chance to take revenge? What would you do? I will still let her live. Why? Scarlet Mage slightly raised an eyebrow from finally having gained a slight change of expression from Riley. Because anyone who hurts my sister shall live in pain for the rest of their lives. I see. Scarlet Mage let out a long and deep sigh as she stood up from the floor. Thank you for answering my questions truthfully. From then on, the 5 superheroes no longer relied on Riley's answers on the paper, as it was obvious that he had a hard time literally understanding the questions as they truly were. And throughout the interview, there were all sorts of sighs and slight gasps as Riley continued to answer their questions without even a single pause. And finally, after what seemed like half an hour, thank you, Mr. Riley. You may now go back to the waiting room. Okay, did I pass? You did. And please call your sister. We will interview her next. All right. Riley only bowed his head before quickly leaving the room. And now, with him gone, another bout of loud sighs echoed throughout the room as the 5 superheroes all leaned on their seats, tired and beaten. He is definitely in the potential villain list, right? The superhero wearing a blindfold said as he fanned himself with Riley's paper. Definitely, man. What about the rest of you? I don't think so. Spectacular Mustache Man shook his head as he once again stroked his mustache. You have to understand he isn't a normal kid. Most villains aren't right in the head, Smem. A potential villain would at least try to lie on the written tests. He clearly didn't, Spectacular Mustache Man said as he lightly slammed his palm on the table. Maybe he's not even capable of lying. I heard some people with autism are like that. Isn't that more troublesome than, just based on his answers, potential villain it is, B? No, he's not. Before the blindfolded superhero could stamp Riley's paper, Scarlet Mage, who had been quiet the whole conversation, finally spoke up throughout the whole interview. Not even once did his heart change a beat. I was right then. He's not capable of lying. He is. Scarlet Mage shook her head. On the test, he chose what he thinks a superhero would do in every situation, not what he himself would do. That in itself is a form of lie. So what are you saying? Riley Ross is a blank canvas, Scarlet Mage said as she stamped Riley's paper with blue ink. If anything, he has the purest soul of all the examinees today. Scarlet Mage needs to die, Riley thought as he walked back to the waiting room. He truly wasn't aware that Scarlet Mage had the ability to somewhat see through lies without tampering inside his mind. At that, he thought she was just like her sister, an elemental controller. If she was going to teach in the academy, then he would definitely need to find a way to dispose of her without alerting anyone's suspicion. You're next, Sister Hannah, who was having a conversation with Sylvie, and surprisingly also talking with Gary, quickly approached Riley as soon as he got back to the room. How did it go? She said in a very eager tone. Did you pass? Of course, Riley said as raised both his thumbs. What? How? Hannah let out a short and playful gasp before putting on the biggest smile on her face as she nudged her brother a couple of times. Because I chose to push an old woman off the street. And so, Riley Ross, also known as the supervillain Dark Day, will finally start his not-so-normal life as a normal superpowder student. Chapter 10 Declaration of War. Are you sure you have everything? Do you have the portable fire extinguishers ready? Did you bring enough? Did you make sure all of your clothes are phosphorescent? What about you, Riley? Did you bring the 1 gallon of sunscreen we bought you? Mother, we are moving to the academy dorms, not another country. Besides, Father will also be teaching. Hannah's muffled screams whispered through the air as Bernard quickly covered her mouth, not allowing her to speak any further. Another month had passed since Riley's very successful entrance exam, and now the Rosses were in front of the entrance of the academy, with Diana refusing to leave her children for almost an hour now. Remember what we practiced. Never, ever call me father when we are at school, whether I am in costume or not, Bernard whispered as he glared at her daughter. Hannah, however, only slapped her father's hand away. You look more suspicious doing that, I swear. How on earth have you survived this long without your secret identity getting discovered? Hannah rolled her eyes as she rushed inside the almost 3-meter-thick gate of the academy. I'll meet you inside, blank face. She then waved at Riley before disappearing into the depths of the campus. I'm not done. Get back, he. Before Diana could finish her words, Riley suddenly followed her sister inside, not even letting her say her farewells. The only thing Diana could do was let out a long and deep sigh as she lightly hugged her husband. They truly grow up so fast, don't they? They do, Bernard quickly nodded. Now, let's take you home so I can return here before the entrance ceremony starts. It's not fair that I am the only one not attending the academy, Diana pouted. Maybe I should also apply as a teacher. That's not going to happen, Bernard chuckled. Just wait for me at home. Okay, we finally have the house by ourselves after 18 long years. Maybe it's time we welcome another Ross into our family. First of all, I would like to congratulate all of you for making it to the academy, and secondly, I would also like to congratulate you on your first step to being an actual superhero. Wake me up when the old man stops talking. As soon as the welcoming ceremony started, Hannah quickly moved her chair nearer to Riley's, leaning her head on his shoulder as she closed her eyes to sleep through the speech being given by the president of the Mega Academy, the superhero known as Prophet. The Prophet is an old hero, almost as old as Mega Woman herself. Besides being an active part of the government, not much is known about him. Riley had also not had the pleasure of having to encounter Prophet as Dark Day, so all of his attention was currently on him. Riley did not even notice the stares they were getting from the other students, not even from the one beside him. The fact that you have made it here is already an accomplishment, so I am very proud of all of you. Prophet continued his speech, his smiles enough to overwhelm the huge scar he had on his face. You are the very first batch of students of America's Mega Academy, therefore, I can't promise that your stay here will be perfect. But what I can promise you is that once we are ready to let you go, you will come out of that gate a superhero. Perhaps Hannah had the right mentality, as Prophet's speech truly did last a very long time. The excitement on the students' faces has already died down, as Prophet did not seem to have any plans to stop even after an hour of talking. At this point, only two students were left actively listening to what he was saying, Riley and Sylvie. The former trying to figure out Prophet while the latter was waiting. But she did not need to wait for long, as Prophet's speech finally came to an end. And so, to fire up your competitive spirit, based solely on the entrance exam, I shall call to the stage the student we think would have the best chance to replace Mega Womansvalis Saveliana. The crowd quickly woke up as soon as Prophet's claps echoed throughout the entire hall. Some of them, who were already in dreamland, were slightly confused, but as soon as they saw someone walking to the stage, they just instinctively also clapped their hands. Even Hannah was a victim of this domino effect, as she clapped her hands as soon as she was woken up by it. What's happening, Riley? Hannah weakly muttered as she tried her best to open her eyes. Riley, however, completely ignored her as he stared emptily towards the wall on the back of the stage. Best chance to replace Mega Woman, he repeated Prophet's words in his mind. What did they mean by replace Mega Woman? Was he just overthinking things, or did something happen to Mega Woman that the government wasn't telling people? Was it really the right decision for him to return her there? Perhaps he should have kept her with the others, or maybe just took care of her himself. Earth to Riley. Riley's erratically moving eyes then stopped as Hannah waved her hands in front of his face. Are you really actually in love with that Sylvie girl? You do know I have her number, right? We became friends during the exams while you were being interviewed. I can give it to you if you want. What about it? No, Riley just shook his head in response. I was thinking about Mega Woman. Sister, what? Since when were you a fan of her? I am not. It's just that it seems that something is wrong with H. Before Riley could finish his words, a high-pitched screeching noise whistled through the air, almost deafening everyone in the hall. Sorry. It was then followed by Sylvie's something anxious voice as she tried to fiddle with the microphone in front of her. But finally, after a few more seconds, her long and deep breath reverberated through the air. First of all, I would like to thank the Academy for providing all of us students such a warm welcome. I am going to keep my speech short because I know all of us are excited to take our first step as students of the Academy. I know I am, so there really is only one thing I want to say to all of you. Sylvie closed her eyes as she once again took a long and deep breath, before once again opening her mouth and scanning the fellow students in front of her. I will be the one to surpass Mega Woman. Hearing Sylvie's words, not only the crowd of students, but also the faculty all shared a collective expression of awe, amusement, and irritation, creating an orchestra of gasps within the halls. So please, forgive me as I do my best to stay at the top. That is all I wanted to say. Thank you. Even after the students were told that they may leave the hall to see their class assignments and designation, none of them stood up from their seats. They could once again only watch as Sylvie left the hall by herself. What she did was basically a declaration of war, and most of the crowd here that had seen her during the exhibition had already given up hope in fighting against her for the crown. However, there were some whose fires have only grown bigger as they accepted Sylvie's challenge. Oh ho, your girlfriend truly knows how to make an entrance, blank. Riley. Hannah tried to nudge Riley with her elbows but almost stumbled as she found the seat next to her suddenly empty. Where the fuck is that idiot? Hannah quickly stood up as Riley was suddenly nowhere to be found. Don't tell me.